It's good to be back with you for an important conversation about law school grades and, in particular, the curve. It's common in law schools to grade on a curve. This is one more thing, like learning to write memoranda in the fall and briefs in the spring, that you have in common with 1Ls throughout the country. But it might be something you've never experienced before or never fully understood, and it therefore might be a source of anxiety. The goal of this video is to demystify the curve, which I hope will reduce some of your anxieties about grading and maybe even give you a little more control over grades. First, I'll show you a curve. Second, I'll talk about the pros and cons of grading on a curve. Finally, I'll talk about how curving is done at Colorado Law. So let's start with the first topic, a typical curve. This curve, like any curve, is an inverted U or a bell. The underlying idea is that data naturally plot a curve. Most data points cluster around the middle, with a few either extraordinarily above or below that average. For grades, most people do about the same as one another, with a few people either doing extremely well or extremely poorly. Now, nobody wants to be on the extremely poor end of the curve, and that's a scary prospect. But in a lot of ways, the curve is a good thing. And that brings me to my second point. The curve isn't all bad. Like anything, it has its pros and cons. So let's take a look at the pros. How are curves good for students? Well, the curve allows teachers to deviate from a theoretically perfect score and grade students based on what they can really do. For instance, there's a theoretical 100 points possible for every assignment I give out, and an experienced attorney would probably actually get 100 points, or close to it. But a student, even a top student, may not. The curve accommodates the difference between theoretical perfection, what an experienced attorney could do, and what an actual 1L student can do. Here's an example. Suppose a law professor gave an exam and the top score was only 50 points, far from the 100 points possible. With the curve, that 50 becomes a perfect score, and the student who gets it earns an A. Moreover, all of the other students are judged against 50 points as the perfect score, not 100 points. So a student scoring only 40 gets a B, and a student scoring only 35 gets a C. Needless to say, without the curve, all three students would be getting very different and much worse grades. So in rigorous subjects like law and math and others, the curve can be a benefit to students. Okay, what then are the cons of the curve? Well, one criticism is that curves impose an arguably artificial structure on grades. My undergraduate degree, as you know, was in math, with a concentration in education. The criticism some educators had then, and still have, is that curves can't accommodate a class where everyone performs at an A level. In other words, curves prevent teachers from giving every student an A. And couldn't it be the case that every student deserves an A? Isn't that our goal as teachers, to give every student the tools to get an A on the exam? The argument here is that curves don't make sense in an educational setting, that grades probably don't naturally conform to a bell curve, and that even if they do, a really large group of students would be necessary to get a real curve. So now that you've seen a curve and heard a bit about the pros and cons of curving grades, let's talk about my final subject, the curve at Colorado Law. As an initial matter, you may hear that there is no curve at CU Law, and there's some truth to that. Technically, there's only one requirement for grades at Colorado Law, the middle student, the median, must get a B+. That means that in a class of 31 people, 15 could get an A and 15 could get a B, as long as one, the middle one, got a B+. Or it could mean that all the students got a B+, or one student got an A and all the rest got a B+, or any number of other combinations. That said, it's standard at Colorado law to have a curve that looks like the one we just saw. In fact, at the end of each semester, the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs sends an email like this one to the faculty. The email suggests how many A's, A minuses, B pluses, B's, and so forth each professor should give. And 1L teachers especially are held to this, so that 1L students are graded fairly across classes and across professors. It would be unfair, in other words, if one, say, legal writing professor gave out 15 A's and 16 B pluses, and the others gave out grades consistent with this curve. Two students taking the same course, but from different professors, would be getting graded very differently. So ultimately, even though Colorado law only requires that the middle student get a B+, in reality, most professors in most classes, especially 1L classes, are going to distribute grades very much like this. In fact, another thing the Associate Dean sends the faculty is this table. It shows how to distribute grades based on class size. So if you're in a large class, like contracts right now with, let's say, 80 students, about 27 of you will get A's or A minuses, about 27 will get B pluses, and about 27 will get B's or below. What does this mean? It means that most people, most of the time in most of their classes, will get B pluses. Don't panic and don't be upset if this happens to you. As a matter of fact, you should be very happy if your grades are all B pluses or above. This means your GPA will be right where you want it to be. In fact, let's talk a little bit about GPAs and how letter grades and GPAs relate to one another. If your GPA is 3.3 or above, you're doing great. That's a B plus average. If you're above a 3.3, that's wonderful. Remember, a 3.7 GPA is an A minus GPA, which is a very high GPA for law school. Finally, if you're below a 3.3, don't despair, but do talk to your professors about how you could have done better, and make an appointment with somebody in academic support to get some targeted help. Many people experience better grades in their 2L and 3L years, so don't let a disappointing semester get you down or prevent you from striving for better grades in future classes. As for your grade for me in legal writing, I'll give you the benefit of any doubt, and I'll be as generous as I can while still adhering to the curve the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs suggests. With that, we're done with our conversation on the curve. I hope it's given you some useful information not only about curves generally, but about how curving occurs at Colorado law.